Welcome to another episode of Real Estate the Right Way with your host, Michael.Wright, residential realtor on Long Island, New York, delivering the best educational content when it comes to residential real estate. If you appreciate and find value in this content, like the video, subscribe to the channel, hit that bell so you're always notified of new videos, and ask me a question in the comments about your specific situation. I'm always here to help. We're heavy in on the process of selling your home. We took it from preparing the home for sale, developing our marketing and advertising strategy, taking photos and videos, posting the listing live on a multitude of different medias, and we started showing the house. Maybe we had an open house, and now that a few buyers, hopefully a lot of buyers, have seen the property, the next step is going to be offers. How do we get them? What do we do when we receive them? And then how do we make sure that the buyer we want to move forward with will actually be able to close? That's what this video is all about, so let's dive in. Now, what's nice about our MLS system is now that showings have been requested and confirmed, we now have a log of all the other agents who have shown the property. So it's very easy to reach out to them to solicit some feedback, figure out if their buyers are interested, and if their buyers are a little apprehensive, figure out if those are certain roadblocks that we can overcome or address to then extract an offer out of them. Another important tip is to keep a log of the buyers that we show personally, so that way we can follow up with them. They're not always going to reach back out, especially in first-time home buyer situations. Buyers don't necessarily know the next step and that they should be reaching out to an agent. They might expect the agent to be reaching out to them, and if the agent doesn't reach out to them, they might say, "Ooh, geez, I guess that house is no longer available," or "I guess I'm not qualified." It's always kind of in a person's nature to think the problem is with them as opposed to them taking the first step to reach out to the other party. So it is incredibly important to keep a log of everyone who's shown the property, all the agents that have shown the property, and solicit feedback from every single one to make sure that we're not leaving an offer under a stone somewhere. So as showings occur, we reach out to everyone who's seen it to see if they'd like to submit an offer. And once that offer is submitted, that begins the negotiation process. Now, to begin the negotiation process, the seller is in the strongest position of leverage, the highest amount of strength when there are multiple offers. And I'll go into a little bit more detail a little later on in the video on how that works. And I'd also recommend checking out episode 4 of the How to Buy a House series, where I dive into what's inside of an offer and all the different categories of negotiating points that in that video are on the buying side. But if something's in an offer, then obviously that is relevant to the seller because the offer is being made to the seller. So a lot of things that may be important to the buyer are also important to the seller, but there's also some key points that might be important to the seller and not the buyer, or vice versa, really important to the buyer and not the seller. And when we uncover those points of what's really important to the seller, but also what's really important to the buyer, and if those things differ, that's where we can really put a deal together and make sure that our client, whether it's the buyer or the seller, gets the best possible value. So why is it important to market, advertise, and price a home to solicit multiple offers? I'll show you. In a single offer scenario, we have a buyer and we have a seller. And the seller is at the list price. The buyer makes an offer. The seller makes a counteroffer. The buyer makes another offer. The seller makes a counteroffer. And hopefully we can meet somewhere in the middle. It might be more in the seller's favor. It might be more in the buyer's favor. It depends on the situation in both parties, where the list price is, where the buyer's starting point is, and also the market value of the house and how much we can uncover about the buyer's situation to leverage the seller's strengths. Which is why when buyers ask me, or even sellers ask me, how much do offers typically come in under or over list price depending on the market conditions, it's really difficult to say because it all depends on the difference between the market value and the list price, because those are not always the same things. Actually, they're rarely the same thing. And this is what happens when we have one offer, right? One buyer makes an offer, the seller's negotiating with this buyer, and we probably get to a point where it's not all the way as high as the buyer would go, but also not all the way as low as the seller would go. But both parties are happy. The seller gets their house sold to a qualified buyer. The buyer's getting the house that they want, and we move forward through the contract process. But what happens in a multiple offer scenario? The seller has their list price, maybe a little bit below market value. And then we have 3 buyers that are all interested in this property at the same time. Typically, this happens when a property is first listed. So during the first weekend or first week that the property is listed, we have 3 buyers that are interested in purchasing your property. They all submit offers. Then we ask for a round of highest and best. And when we say highest and best, we mean highest purchase price, but also best terms. And again, in the 4th episode of How to Buy a House, I go into all of the terms and why each one of those is important. We're working with these 3 buyers. They've all submitted offers on your home. We ask for their highest and best offer. And what that means is, how much are they willing to lose the house? And I explain this scenario to buyers that I'm working with. When we're presenting an offer on a property, we have to define how much that house is worth to them, to those buyers, right? So I'm working with buyers and I say, how much is the house worth to you? Because different houses are worth different amounts to different people for different reasons. Here's the example I give. The towns are inconsequential, so we'll use let's say middle of the island. So I have one buyer who wants to be in the village of Babylon, south of Montauk Highway, with a 4-bedroom, 2.5-bath colonial, fireplace, 2-car garage on at least 1/3 of an acre. I have another buyer who's looking anywhere from Lindenhurst to East Islip, would prefer to be south of Montauk, definitely south of Sunrise. Can do 3 or 4 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms is okay. They'd prefer more. And 1-car garage is okay, 2-car garage is great. They're pretty flexible. They're really just looking for a value. So a house comes on the market in Babylon Village, south of Montauk Highway, that fits the first buyer's criteria. Now, this house also fits the second buyer's criteria, but the first buyer needs 4 bedrooms because of the size of their family. They want to be south of Montauk Highway because maybe relatives or friends or family live really close by and they need some extra hands childcare wise, or maybe they keep their boat in a marina close by. There are external reasons or internal reasons why that location is extremely important to them, and the house criteria is something that they can afford and also they find value in. The second buyer would also be interested in that property for the right price, but their main goal isn't necessarily all the bells and whistles or that specific location. Their main goal is an equity play, and they want to find value for their family and maybe build some long-term wealth. So as this property comes online, buyer number 1 might say, oh my God, this house is exactly what we're looking for. There's maybe 6 houses in this entire neighborhood that fit what I'm looking for, and this is the one that's on the market. There's no others to look at. We need this house. And buyer number 2 might say, yeah, that house is nice. We'll put in an offer. We'll put in an offer at asking, and if we get it, we get it. Sounds like Stella sees a squirrel outside. Now, when we ask for all of our buyers' highest and best offers, buyer number 1, which needs this type of house in this location, is going to say, yeah, this house is worth this much to me. Buyer number 2 is going to say, yeah, this house is worth what you're asking, I'm really looking for a value. You priced it well, but that's about all that I'm willing to pay. And then buyer number 3 comes in, and maybe buyer number 3 is somewhere in the middle. So what we've done here is we've taken where the house would have sold if we were just negotiating with one buyer to even farther because of the multiple offer scenario. You see, in the psychology of humans, you take a look at kids, right? When kids are in a room playing with their toys, there's one toy in the corner that nobody wants to play with until another kid wants to play with that toy. And you know what? That kind of scarcity mentality, we never really grow out of it. We want something even more when we know that someone else wants it. The same thing is true when it comes to buying houses. Now, we've taken this scenario where we were negotiating with one buyer and found a point where it wasn't exactly as high as the buyer would go and also not as low as the seller would go, to a situation where we're asking the buyer, how much is this house worth to you specifically? When I'm talking to buyers and figuring out what that number is, the conversation goes like this. Let's say we have a house listed at $579, and the house is really sharply priced. We know there's going to be multiple offers. How much is this house worth to them? And I say, okay, if another buyer comes in and offers $590, would you say, oh shoot, like I would have paid $590 for that house? And you'd be disappointed that you knew someone else got the house for $590. Then we increase our offer. And we say, okay, at $600, would you be upset if you found out that another buyer bought the house for $600, assuming you could afford it? And I say, yeah, man, $600, yeah, a couple of the other houses that we saw that were listed for $600, this house has so much more than that. We would definitely pay $600 for this. Okay, $605. Yeah, I think we would pay $605 for it. What about $610? If another buyer were to buy this house for $610, would you pay $610? Would you be disappointed that you didn't offer $610? Geez, I don't know. $610 is kind of getting up there. It's a little bit close to the top of our budget, and we saw that other house around the corner down the road that sold for $610. It had what this house had. It was a little bit nicer, but I guess this house would work for us as well. What about $612? So, I don't know, $612, that's probably our max. Okay, well here's what's interesting. When we list a property, it could sell for $10,000, $20,000, even $80,000, $100,000 over the list price. When we get multiple offers, the top 2 or 3 are usually within a few $1,000s of one another, even though they have no idea where the other offers are. But these buyers have been in the market for a while. They understand the market value, and they know what they have to offer to get it because they've missed out on other offers or on other houses that they made offers on. So in this scenario where we're thinking about $612, a couple $100 could make the difference, believe it or not, because someone else might be looking at this same house going, I think $612 is the number. But if we come up to $612,500, $612,750, we got a really good chance of getting it. And those few $100s could push it over the top. So that's how I communicate with buyers when I'm in a multiple offer scenario. And I'll communicate that to agents when we're on the list side so that they understand the best way to communicate to their buyers in a multiple offer scenario to really uncover what the house is worth to them. And that's what's going to get them the house. So that's why positioning a house both in marketing and advertising and pricing for a multiple offer scenario puts the seller in the best position possible to sell the house for the highest dollar amount. Now, so far, we've shown the house, we've solicited offers, we've negotiated offers, and we're just about ready to move forward with one. But before we do, we need to make sure that that buyer can actually close. So how do we do that? Most offers will come with a proof of funds if they're paying cash, or certainly a pre-approval or a pre-qualification if they're obtaining a mortgage. Now, this pre-approval could come from any lending establishment, whether we have history with them or not. They're just as anything, just as real estate agents, real estate photographers, banks and lenders, printer salespeople. There's a level of quality that certain institutions bring and certain institutions don't bring. So we need to make sure that the person that pre-approved this buyer who wants to purchase your property can actually afford what their pre-approval says. So what often happens is, if we're familiar with the lender, if we've had experience with them, we can submit an email to the loan officer making sure that the buyer's assets, income, credit report, and tax returns were all verified by the loan officer, so that way we know the loan officer confirmed the information that the buyer was telling them before writing the pre-approval. We'll also ask if this purchase is subject to a sale of another property, and make sure that this buyer has enough assets, enough cash, enough capital to cover a short appraisal if that's part of the offer. If we don't have a relationship with the lender that's on the pre-approval, we may suggest to the seller that the seller requires that the buyer get pre-approved by a lender that we all trust. And that way we know that the buyer who's purchasing the house has been vetted by someone who actually knows what they're doing. There's a couple quick clarification points in this scenario, right? When a seller asks a buyer to get pre-approved again, the buyer will have certain apprehensions. They don't want their credit pulled again, they've already been pre-approved, it's a long and arduous process, and honestly, if they didn't really go through the process, now they're nervous because they don't have any of their docs ready. So in this scenario, the seller is not asking the buyer to get their mortgage with their preferred lender. The buyer is free to get their mortgage with whomever they want. The only criteria here is that the buyer get pre-approved by this trusted lender. The other apprehension from the buyer is that they don't want another hard pull on the credit. Now, I think this was in my second video of how to buy a house. That's actually not true. So when a buyer is getting pre-approved for a mortgage, they could get pre-approved by multiple different lenders, and the credit bureaus, if they get 3 or 4 or 5 pre-approvals, don't think that buyer is going to buy 3 or 4 or 5 houses. They know that they're only buying one house. If that buyer gets pre-approved for a house, applies for a credit card, goes to buy a used car, buys a mattress on credit, maybe gets a loan pre-approval for a boat, all of those things are in completely different categories. So each one is going to be a hard pull on their credit because the credit bureaus think that these people might be overextending themselves. So it is okay to get pre-approved by multiple lenders, and it's also okay to ask a buyer to get pre-approved by a lender that you trust. Because ultimately, you want to have confidence that if you're taking your house off the market and moving forward with a buyer, that they need to be qualified to purchase your home. So let's recap. Where are we? We prepped the house, we marketed it, we advertised it, we priced it well, we had showings, maybe we had an open house, we've solicited, negotiated, and qualified offers. We want to tell one lucky buyer that we're ready to move forward in the process. What's the next step? Home inspection. Stay tuned for the next video. And thank you for watching another episode of Real Estate the Right Way with your host, Michael.Wright. Remember to like the video, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell, and ask me a question in the comments. And as always, tell me what home means to you, and I'll help you get there.